Welcome to another edition of Ottawa Exposed. We're not exposing Ottawa today, we're exposing Washington. My name is David Creighton. I'm a senior parliamentary columnist for the Western Standard. I'm joined today by the legendary Seymour Hersh, who really needs no introduction if you've been following journalism and investigative reporting for the last 40 to 50 years. Mr. Hersh recently wrote an article for Substack that was very explosive, and it described an explosion in the Baltic Sea. And Mr. Hersh says he has gained intelligence that says the United States blew up the Nord Stream pipelines. Now, Seymour, I'm not going to imagine in any way where that intelligence and where that information came from. You received it, but I'd like to know, before you talk to the individual or individuals who pass this information on, did you suspect from the beginning that the sabotage operation was obviously a U.S. operation?
You know, we always have a lot of suspicions about everything, it's hard to say. Did I brood about it? No, I was probably thinking of other things. But I will say that I've been around for 300 years as a journalist in Washington, writing anonymously about sources and writing for the New York Times and the New Yorker and other places like that, London Review of Books. And so over the years, I get to know a lot of people, and they become friends too. You know, people on the other side. You know, it's in the intelligence community. And so last fall, after the it was, if you remember, the pipeline were blown up on the 26th of September, and then it just I don't think I've been doing something else involving a lot of talk to people, historical stuff about Vietnam, because I did a lot of stuff on Vietnam, and from the massacre of My Lai back in '69, and Vietnam's always been sort of haunting me, because, you know, we say things like, yes, 58,000 American boys died, but, you know, the other side lost between 2 and 3 million, as if it doesn't make much difference. So, but I just happened to ask somebody about it, and I began to learn a lot about it, and from people involved, and I guess you could say people who maybe all I can say is, I said people have, I think what I wrote was people had knowledge of the operation, and that's about all I can say, because I know when you're talking about the United States president blowing up pipelines that belong to an ally, at that point it was called Nord Stream 2. There were two major pipelines from Germany, from Russia directly into Germany. The first was called Nord Stream 1. It was got going in 2011, and it provided cheap methane gas to Germany, which is a major industrial nation. It just built up. For example, it's got a company called BASF, which is the largest chemical company in the world, and it has the automobile dealers we know about, the companies, you know, Mercedes, etc. And so it's just Europe thrived on this gas. And of course, we always saw, going back to the Kennedy days, we saw the richness of Russia was in its oil and gas, and we always worried about Russia selling stuff directly to the Western Europe. That was always, we always thought Russia would. The phrase that the Biden's people have used is weaponizing the gas. So that was a longstanding issue. So then, as if Nord Stream 1 isn't bad enough, a second pipeline was built. These are financed. Gazprom, I know the details very much on the first one, owned 51%, had stockholders that owned 51%. It was the Russian company, very controlled by oligarchs close to Putin. And obviously, in 1 year, $45 billion flowed in from this pipeline into the treasury of Russia. So you can imagine how much money that was in there. The other 49% was owned by 4 companies in Europe who got access to the gas, and they were selling it downstream, which was down to local gas distributors for local homes all over Western Europe and Germany, of course. So everybody was happy. Everybody was warm and comfortable with Pipeline 1. Pipeline 2 came at an awkward time for us because we were fighting a war in Ukraine, and we didn't want at the wish of the United States. I shouldn't say wish. All I know is that the German chancellor a year ago, before that pipeline was completed, Nord Stream 2 these are billion-dollar projects, was completed in late 20, early 21. He sanctioned, he stopped it. It's full of gas and he stopped it. Obviously, a deference to the wishes of President Biden. Biden has made a stand in the Ukraine against Russia, period. He's made that stand. That's been his issue. He's also making a stand against China. I'm not sure where he's going with all of this stuff, but I will tell you that I did work at the New York Times for 7-8 years, and I know how it works. And I can tell you that I don't understand the reporting from the Times and the Washington Post and my old magazine, The New Yorker, because they're presenting a much rosier picture of what's going to happen than I get from my friends. I haven't written about it, but I think we're going to end up in real trouble in Ukraine. And certainly over the last year, Germany, which is after they spent a decade destroying, bombing, murdering, raping Western Europe. To get back into the good graces, they've sort of not much interested in being an army. And so they were being pushed to invest great hundreds of millions of dollars, US dollars, in this aid for Ukraine. And of course, they didn't have the same passions, the same with Western Europe, and even some elements of NATO didn't have the same passion for supporting Ukraine as much as we have. We've probably spent $100 billion so far. We've added it all up. Some of this money to come yet, but incredible amounts of money to support Ukraine. And I think by late fall last year, when the pipelines were blown up, what I did know is that at very best, the information going to President Biden, the intelligence that was available, I'm not sure who read what, was at the best a standoff, a neutral standoff through the next 6-8 months. And now it's pretty clear that Russia is not going to lose this war, despite what you read in the papers. They're going to defeat Ukraine, and even with all our money and all our arms. And the question is, what do we do if that gets close? Are we going to escalate some more? And that was a question. That was a question. Go ahead.
That's exactly the problem. I think the United States and NATO are fighting not only a losing battle, but one that could potentially lead to a nuclear confrontation. But if the United States intentionally blew up a pipeline, is that a declaration of war on Germany, on NATO, on Russia?
Well, you got the real problem with the issue. As you know, the White House has emphatically denied this, and will never admit it because of just what you ask. I don't know if it's let's put it this way: it's not a bombshell for the pipeline; it's a bombshell for Western Europe, because in late September is close to October, November. And I think I don't know what's in Biden's thinking, but the only rational guess or estimate you could have is that Western, the war looks like it's going to get stalemated. It's late September, winter's coming. The pipeline's been sanctioned by Germany. The first pipeline, Nord Stream 1, was stopped by Putin. He cut it off himself about a year earlier in opposition to the rhetoric that was going on. But the second one was going to be the only means of keeping Germany and Europe warm and with gas, with low-cost gas and electricity. Gas drives the turbines that produce the electricity in Europe. And don't forget, Europe has no natural resources. So Biden had to worry about the Germans wavering, because they're traditionally, since the end of World War II, Germany has been very cautious about being a military country, given its relationship with Europe. They bombed and raped and killed in Europe for a decade. And to get into NATO, what they did took a lot of, the famous phrase was, when Willy Brandt, some of your older people know that when he was the chancellor, was Ostpolitik. Ostpolitik meant we're going to be good neighbors. We're going to show you. We're going to be an industrial gold mine. We're going to trade with you. We're going to make things cheaper from you. We're going to get cheap gas for all of you. That was Ostpolitik. Anyway, so what happens is you have to say to yourself, the German people, and I know this from calls from the Bundestag. I don't do any political talk. I don't talk to anybody in politics. Even in the last 50 years, I'd never testified, even in my own Congress. I'll see congressmen. I'll talk to them privately, but I don't test. I'm not a public figure when it comes to that stuff. And so the Germans, I'm getting a lot of calls from people in Germany and other countries. Some places the price of heating is 5 times more. Some places even more. It's going up like crazy. And in summer, the electrical power that's used to generate air conditioning often comes from turbines run by gas. So I mean, you're looking at a real serious problem. So Germany and Western Europe's now discovered that when there's a shove, and crisis, Joe Biden would throw them to the wind and continue to support and cut off their chances of Russia weaponizing its gas to tell Europe don't support. And by doing that, he just blew it up so they couldn't waver. He made an amazing statement that he didn't trust them enough not to waver. And if they got the gas, they would waver. They would be pro-Russian. It's very primitive thinking, I think. And that's what he did. And he gave the order, and there were Americans who did the bombing. I've written about that. It's not just a story. If you read the story, it's a long story, and it's full of specifics, a lot of specifics we don't have to get into. But clearly, either I've got a great imagination or somebody's telling me stuff, one of those two. The White House and my old newspaper, the New York Times, obviously sees this as my imagination, or that I'm dealing with a source that's a ghost. I'm not sure what they think. But
they've called your story fiction, is what their official response was.
Oh, the White House.
But yeah, the White House. But how can they possibly even say that when we have Joe Biden saying he's going to take this pipeline out? And it just seems like too much of a convenience.
He said it in February before these guys in Norway even had it much going. But I'll tell you what, if I were a reporter in Washington, which I was, here's what he hasn't done. He's complained bitterly about me through aides. No senior official has spoken out. Press people have spoken out. The same for the CIA. I didn't even ask the CIA because I assume if you ask the White House, it's the same. I got a heated denial from an aide, somebody in the press office. And so the president has a very special power. He can task, that's the internal word. He can task the American community to do what he wants. There's something called the Office of National Intelligence, which is through legislation in the last decade or so, that office has become the boss of all intelligence. And that office has a director of intelligence who has tremendous control over assets. He can pull everything from the NSA, other agencies, et cetera. So all you have to do if you're the White House and you want to prove that it's not so, task him to give me a paper on it, in late September. Or you can test there's an intelligence directorate in the CIA called the DI, Directorate of Intelligence, that produces a lot of great reports. A lot of very smart people doing a lot of very smart stuff there, believe it or not. And there's also a lot of dumb people doing dumb stuff in the field, but mostly on control of demand of others, dumb others. Anyway.
Have you had any pushback from the Biden administration?
Let me just finish this thought.
Yeah, sure. Sorry.
You can ask that, and there's a secret group inside the agency that does intelligence for our guys in the field. If our guys in the field doing something covert, we got to know if somebody stumbled onto them. So we monitor a lot of intelligence agencies around them. He hasn't asked anybody anything. Why doesn't the president ask if he didn't do it? Why doesn't he get a report and that'll tell him who did it or give him a good clue? I mean, we're awfully good at that. And I assume other countries are just as good at that. I assume the Russians are, but the Russians aren't speaking. But anyway, so that's another question I would ask, but it's not getting asked. Keep on going, David. I'm sorry, interrupted.
No, I'm just curious. Have you had any pushback from the Biden administration in terms of phone calls, or have they ransacked your apartment?
No, that's Cheney once, before Cheney became vice president. Cheney's very smart, by the way. He may have dropped out from Yale, but he's got a very high IQ and very droll in his own way. He's got a sense of humor. I did a lot of work against him in a way after he it is a fact that that Al-Qaeda knocked down 2 buildings. 9/11 was Al Qaeda, Bin Laden, mostly connected, almost tremendously connected to Saudi Arabia. And the security people who do stuff for the Saudis are Pakistanis, but no connection to Iraq, because Saddam hated the crazy Muslim terrorists, and no connection to Syria, where because Bashar Assad hated the Muslim terrorists. So we decided a year and a half after that the solution to Al Qaeda is the take on Iraq, and then we take on Syria. Neither one of which, both of which are led by presidents who are as hostile to Muslim crazies, radicals as we are. I mean, so there's always a funny question about, why it's, who are we to tell somebody else he can't do what he shouldn't do? I will tell you, this doesn't mean that Biden, I can tell you, I have no use for any president, Putin starting a war, the most bloodiest war in Western Europe since World War II. I mean, we had the Balkans and we had stuff with the Chechens, but this is really much, the fact that he did it, it'll be a stain on him the rest of his life. So let's get rid of the notion that there's any idea that there was something virtuous in he did. He didn't have to do what he did. On the other hand, he didn't do it without being pushed. He did it without being pushed. We expanded NATO when we promised not to, and we put missiles in Poland that are 8 minutes away, 800 miles away from Moscow. Very aggressive. They could be made nuclear overnight.
Yeah,
a lot of. I just would think what happened if Russia put missiles in Mexico or Canada, or God forbid Canada. Canada.
Well, I served with NATO in Bosnia in '96, and I thought NATO was always a very credible organization for collective security. Now that just about everybody is a member of NATO, it's like nobody is a member of NATO, and I'm not prepared to go to war for the security of Albania, and I don't think a lot of Americans are either. But do you think the irony of this might be that Joe Biden is going on and on and on about NATO has never been more united? If the United States blew up Germany's pipeline and it's keeping Europe in deep freeze this winter, could this not lead to the dissolution of NATO or incredible rivalry?
I will tell you, were you serving the armed forces then in '96? Because I had my college roommate ended up in the foreign service. And in order to get to FSO1, when he was a 2, he had to do NATO. As a diplomat, I got to tell you, it's at that time they had about 28 members. They started with 19, mostly in Western Europe, and then now you have Spain, Italy is in there with Montenegro, places like that. I don't know who else is in there. I should take a list. I always make a joke that maybe it's one of those countries that did the landlocked countries that did the mining, blew it up. But anyway. NATO was they celebrate the annual holidays of all the countries, so which means every other weekend that's a reason not to go to work. Some countries got their national weekend, and anyway, it's just I think things are heating up in Germany. I know that very much anger about they clearly. Western Union, we've always had their back. America's always had their back after World War II. And one of the good things that came out of what we did was rebuilding Europe and making sure the countries were plural societies. I mean, the CIA, in some places where it could, our CIA, for example, in Italy, we threw in with the mafia because it was so powerful, and the Christian Democrats were so corrupt, rather than elect a guy leading to the left, in 46. We did that too, and we did the same in Greece. But in Europe, it was pretty much it evolved into the kind of great places to live and work. And so you're asking the right question. One person I know well who knows that part of the world very well, a military officer, but in intelligence, said to me, "Well, the question now is who's going to be the first country to leave NATO." I mean, I'm serious, because he started something, Joe Biden, that he didn't understand, and that's largely because he's surrounded by these I call them wink and blink and nod, Tony Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, and Jake Sullivan, who ran this little White House operation I was talking about when they wanted to have options on what to do. He was the guy to set up the stuff in Norway in a way. And what's her name? Victoria Nuland, who's the undersecretary, whose husband was one of the leading neocons that pushed in after 9/11 to go to Iraq. So Kagan, and I mean, it's just I'm a journalist, but I'm also a citizen, and I think there's something, like you do, there's something really wrong with what we're doing in Ukraine, to the point where the president of the United States is willing to throw Germany and Western Union to the wind.
Yeah,
he's afraid they wouldn't support him more in Ukraine for the gas, so he knocks off the gas. That's what he did, and that's exactly what happened. And by the way, the pipeline was full of gas, 750 miles full of methane gas. That's why it was such a big bubble. It wasn't pumping, but they had filled it.
Yes.
And they broke this. Then they sanctioned it, and once they filled it, they couldn't take it out. And so it'd been there. Nothing happened to it in a year. But it's just as you say, the implication of the story is so amazing. I don't think the White House is ever going to acknowledge it. How can they? So it's
I don't think the Russian Federation would have dissolved the Warsaw Pact if they knew NATO was going to continue to expand and encroach on its own borders. And
I think they've always considered Ukraine, Russia, as a subculture. And, in the 1930s, 31, 32, there were famines, and Stalin let 22 million die for lack of food. He took the rice up north, up to Russia. So they've always treated it as a subculture, and it's a huge country, and it cuts them off from Europe. And he's always wanted that blocking group there. Putin, the leader of Russia, has always had it. And Putin's not a communist anymore. He's a big nationalist, and he believes in the mythology of Russia. That's a simple way of putting it. But he's not going to let. There are certain provinces that border Russia that he's going to keep. Donetsk and others. He's going to keep the Crimea. I'm sure he's willing to deal about other stuff, but right now Zelensky's not going to be able to say. I think 6 months ago they could have cut a deal maybe with something, give him a year to stay, but he's not going to stay. And the more we talk and the worse we go. And Biden was just in Europe ginning up the Poles and the Hungarians who don't like Russia anymore, and everybody. Look, NATO never wanted Ukraine. That would be buying into that incredible corruption there. And it's just incredible. Yeah. And now we do things like we're giving them the Patriot missile, which takes a year to train, and each missile costs $1 million. And the M1 Abrams tank, which runs on almost like jet fuel, very expensive, high-end fuel. They're all going to be left starving for gas, and it's full of equipment that you have to train these guys for months on it. None of these things have anything to do with it. It's going to be a war in which Russian artillery is going to pound the hell out of the Ukrainians. Ukraine is burning shells at 400 times the rate we did in combat. They burn more in a month than we burned when we were in combat, American soldiers, in a week. And the difference is, in America, if you want to get more weapons quickly, you have to negotiate with corporations and get agreements and contracts and lawyers. In Russia, the armaments factory is state-owned. So he's got it going. He's going to have many more missiles. He's not running out of missiles. It's all the talk about begging from North Koreans or begging from China. He's producing missiles now. And so it's just, the end game is very bad. And what are we going to do? It was in Europe last week, the president ginning up support for a war that won't win. So what's the end game? I don't see it.
I've been a hawk most of my professional life as a military officer and as a small C conservative pundit, but I have never been more disgusted with the cheerleading that's going on amongst journalists in Canada, in the United States, and in Europe, pushing us towards this nuclear confrontation.
I think, believe it or not, despite what you've read, I read what Putin has said. I read the translations. in Sochi once years back, he said, if we have to all go to hell, we're going to all go to hell. But I don't think we're going to hell. If it's a nuclear holocaust, I still think we'll go to God. He said, but since then, their doctrine's really plain about no first use. And I'm serious. It's a really strong doctrine. And so what that means, if it's going to get started, it might not be by him. I don't know what to tell you. There was a lot. Oh, I'm sorry.
I really think this is like the First World War, in that we seem to be sleepwalking towards this inevitable confrontation. And it's not inevitable. We need to start talking peace in Ukraine. And we're stumbling into this potentially catastrophic situation.
Well, as a military guy, then you've read about, the dumbest war fought was World War One. The trench warfare. With every time I start reading about World War One, the literature and the poetry, Sassoon, and the lines, it's just amazing. On the other hand, there should be in America, what we're missing is a military voice saying what you're saying, a high level one. They're not. The new chairman. The chairman of the JCS, the last couple have been not much. Milley and the guy Dunford before him. The last good chairman was a guy named Norm Dempsey, who was chairman, and he retired in 2005 after 4 years. And here's where the press is strange. I'm sorry, I got to turn off my phone. I thought I had done
it. Okay.
What I thought I did, but who cares? Phone rings a lot.
Sure it does.
I'll tell you something about Norm Dempsey. He was went to West Point, majored in English, and was one of the few West Pointers that was allowed to go to graduate school for 2 years. He went to, was it Duke, or he went to some competent school, and he studied Yeats poetry, Irish poetry, which he was interested in music. Got his master's degree, and then became a warrior, became a division commander in combat, made 4 stars, made the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And so when he retires, there's a retirement ceremony. It's on YouTube or someplace. It's had me last time I looked about me and something hiss. And his retirement ceremony, instead of giving the bellicose speech there, though this is Obama and everybody's giving oh la la la, he's saying an Irish ballad about it's been a good time, farewell my troops, I'll miss you. And then on cue, I guess, instead of the speech, he looked and nodded, and his children, he had 3 or 4 children with a lot of grandchildren. They let all the kids come, and they all ran. And they jumped into his arms. That was his farewell statement. And the next day, it was this August 31st, the next day, instead of going in 6 corporate boards, as every chairman has for $3 million and building a house on the bay, by Annapolis, the Chesapeake Bay, there's a lot of beautiful homes there. He went and joined the faculty of Duke as a visiting professor of military ethics and literature or poetry, and nobody picked it up. Nobody reported on it. We only honor the guys that do their 4 years and stumble around and walk in the Raytheon or Booz Allen and make billions. It's so interesting to me how we miss things. You miss it, and so we're in trouble.
Yeah.
We're in real trouble because we don't have the military leadership we want. Those guys are still planning for in case Russia wins. They're still thinking about what kind of peace agreement we're going to have with Russia. I'm serious. I know I can't make this up. I'm serious. That's one of the planning groups. I'm sure you have a lot of planning groups for everything. That's pretty comical. I don't know what they smoke over there or what's in the water.
Well,
but they come out, and these retired guys that go on TV for CNN and MSNBC and other places
and Fox, yes,
Fox, they're out there. They're in some zone that doesn't exist.
No, they're all itching for a war with Russia. It's just incredible to me.
Yeah, you got it. What branch were you in?
Air Force.
Oh, yeah. Were you rated? Were you up in the air, or were you on the ground? What were you doing?
Well, I was up in the air a lot, but I was a public affairs officer. I was a flak, so I knew where the skeletons were buried. And
John Kirby is the current flak for the Joint Chiefs,
and I've never seen a more incompetent person in my life.
Well, but actually, the funny thing is, he's just doing the job. But I knew him back when he was at the Pentagon as a spokesman there, and I did a lot of stuff on CIA operations that were really crazy in places like Iran for the New Yorker, and I was interfacing with him a lot. I always liked him, and I saw him. I've talked to him about this long before I published, because that's what I do. I just give a heads up, and I was surprised to see John out there doing peddling. And last week he made a statement, the same statement they'd made earlier, but that made news. And
Yeah.
so they got him to do it, but they haven't got Sullivan to do it, or Blinken. I don't want to. Maybe I'm going to force them to do it, or Victoria Nuland, or the president to say anything, or the head of the CIA. And then I don't see those guys talking. Look, they did it. They're stuck. They did it. And even if somebody inside admits it, they'll say that's just wrong. Show me a video. You know, they're not going to stop denying it. And they get away right there, as you know, they have, you know, much too much authority. I think much too much briefing of the New York Times and the Washington Post, and so they managed to cool those papers out. Tell him, I'm sure privately, say he's absolutely wrong. He's going nuts on this and all this stuff that they say. And but you know, in the long run, you can't stop truth from coming, and something will happen.
Something
will happen.
Now, your most recent article I was reading, you have discussed how the Norwegians have historically played a role with assisting the United States in their wars. I find it fascinating that the United States never declared war in Vietnam, but yet waged war in Vietnam for 11 years. Are they doing the same thing? Is this like the Gulf of Tonkin resolution?
The piece I did, it was Wednesday. I did it because for two reasons. Everybody's denying everything about the story. Norway, why would Norway do it? Norway was a big player in the North Vietnam before the war was declared. Norway had, the Norwegians are great seamen, and they beginning about in the 1980s, we ran what they call PT boats in World War II. You know, John Kennedy and the PT boat. And by the way, John Kennedy, I've read a lot of his letters that he wrote to people when he was overseas. He's a very witty, funny, charming guy. Mm-hmm. I just wish he'd stayed out of politics, because we wouldn't have had Vietnam. But anyway, it's another story. But there was he was apparently quite an attractive man. And so Norway built a super PT boat. They have some funny word for it, with a lot of armaments, fast and good. And they sold a bunch to America. And then they sent a bunch in about early 2000 and 1964, early on. We were only fighting in the South, and we undeclared war. But we were also doing some stuff on the North that they admitted, you know, that they were doing some patrolling, and one of our ships was fired on by a PT boat, and that led to Johnson to make the speech that led to the Congress, a speech saying we've told North Vietnam to stay out, and they attacked our ships, and I have to respond by bombing the North for the first time. All that stuff. I wrote that speech was only 5 minutes. It's in the piece I just wrote Wednesday. I put on Wednesday. Why? Because Norway was deeply involved in the dirty war we were running for, at that time, probably for close to a year. It was 9 months or 6 months anyway, for sure. Longer than that, probably. And not only were they running operations on the coast of North Vietnam, the Norwegians were involved in manning the boats. They're great sailors, and they know how to do stuff. They know how to shoot guns, and they're tough. They don't like communists any more than, you know, most people in America don't. And Navy SEALs were involved in doing kinetic operations inside. And I wrote that some even got wounded badly, and as a SEAL can, they're really tough, crawled their way back to a pickup point, and they got rescued, and they got the Medal of Honor, all in secrecy. All this was being done without anybody in America knowing it, with the idea of convincing North Vietnam to stay out of it. And North Vietnam just kept on going, sending people down. And so Johnson, they manipulated when one of our destroyer they thought there was a submarine, a torpedo attack on them. And the commander issued a SIGINT, you know, message report, alert, you know, it's a critic, they call it. Probably went right to the White House. I'm under attack. And then he rescinded it 20 minutes later, saying, no, it was just a sonar guy. There was a lot of high waves, and they're all rattled, and he made a mistake. I can tell you, I'm not shocking anybody, but some guy in the bottom of a destroyer or American cruiser spends a lot of time reading porn. Believe me, having been there, that's a big deal. Anyway, I don't know, but maybe in the public office, but Solzhenitsyn's office, you didn't dare bother. But anyway, that's what you do when you're 22 and you're locked up below, 9 hours, 12 hours a day. Anyway, but he screwed up. And what the McNamara and Johnson did, they ignored the second cable saying it's not true. And they used the first cable as justification for bombing the North. So I wrote that because it's parallel to where we are now. He's committed, I didn't say an act of war. I don't think I wrote that. He's committed a great mistake. He screwed up. He's told the North, he's told rather Germany, it's like an analogy with he's told Germany and NATO, when push comes to shove, I'll throw you over the wall. You can be cold. I don't care. If you're not giving enough money to Ukraine, screw you. That's what he's done.
Yeah.
And he's basically lied when he says he doesn't do he's lying now to push us in the war, like Johnson lied to push us in the war. That was the purpose of that piece. And I actually have more to say on that issue, and I'll do it again next week. I'm going to, it doesn't, I don't know what's going to make the major papers and the networks of America begin to wake up that there's something going on here. But anyway, you and I have yapped too long. I got to go. I haven't had.
I know. This has been fascinating because I think what happened with Nord Stream is the historical equivalent of the assassination of the Archduke Ferdinand in 1914.
Don't say that. I haven't gone there in my thinking. I just want. I mean, I look. Guess what? I think you're totally right. But, the good thing is, in the real world, it doesn't matter where you are, I think.
Yeah.
I watch cable. I stopped watching cable television in America, CNN, MSNBC, and all that stuff. I don't like Fox News, even though Tucker Carlson's interesting because I've known him years ago. He's very smart. I don't, I'm not into the politics, but he figured out right away what's going on with the pipeline. And he wasn't afraid to say it like on other people. But I will say this, that when I watch cable news, they'll have some serious issue, and then they'll have a panel on about. And so, let's say it's a bunch of journalists, something that's going on in the media, and they'll say to 3 White House chiefs, I don't know why all these reporters go on TV so much. I never did when I was a reporter at the New York Times. Anyway, and they say, so what's the thinking at the White House? And the 3 panels all begin with the first 2 words that are the most deadly in the world, I think. So it doesn't matter what you and I think about whether this is going to be a 1914 reviewed again, but it does matter that we are thinking that way. In other words, this could be the beginning of not something nice, something very unnice.
Yeah.
All right, on that wonderful cheery note, I'm going to go back to whatever I'm doing. What am I doing today?
Okay.
I don't know.
Cy Hersh, it was a pleasure and an honor to talk to you today. I've been a fan for all of my professional life of your work, and keep it up. Keep it up, my friend.
Let me tell you something. It's important for guys like you who care about stuff to do what you do. It just is. You're right now. You're a very distinct minority in the media crowd. You're somebody who actually figures out that there's a problem here and wants to do something about it. And I think that's great. That's why I'm here. Goodbye. I'm going to whatever I'm going to.
Okay.
I think I have to go shopping or something like that.
Okay. You have a good day. And I hope we can speak again. Thank you.
Did you get blasted by this last storm or not up there?
Yes, but not as bad as you did. Anyway.
You don't talk like a Knox. No, who? No, none of that. None of that.
No.
Big vowel.
None of that. No.
Why not? Why not?
Probably because I grew up on the west coast of Canada, near Vancouver.
I got to tell you something. My wife and I have gone hiking up there, up towards Whistler. In the summer, you can hike up to Glacier Lakes. It's an unbelievable part of the world. I don't know. You guys know. It's just great. One of the great parts. Vancouver is one of the great cities in the world too. It's gotten too big though. Gotten too big. Best Chinese food though you can get. Goodbye. Bye bye.
Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Without the CSSA, our gun rights would have been taken long ago. These guys are on the front lines helping to draft smart and intelligent firearms regulations and legislation in Canada, and more importantly, educating the public about how we keep guns out of the hands of the wrong people. To become a member, it's absolutely worth every penny. You can become a Western Standard member for just $10 a month or $99 a year for unlimited